Some of my favorite conversations have happened over the rims of mugs. I'm Denise Harper, co-host of The Bridge Morning Show with Denise and Chris, and program director for The Bridge. There's something special about sitting across the table from a friend, whether we've known them forever or for just a minute, with a good cup of coffee and an open heart. I hope today's conversation will inspire and encourage you. Hi, friend. Thanks for listening today. We have an extra special. Don't I say that every time we get together? This guest today, I'm so delighted to have in the studio with me. And we're talking about something really, really important. And some of the content today may not be suitable for younger children's ears. So I just wanted to kind of give you a little warning. This is definitely an adult conversation, but so important. And I am thrilled to have Yolanda Montgomery in the studio with me today as my guest. Hi, Yolanda.
Hi, Denise.
Longtime friend. And I remember when you first started talking about human trafficking, and I thought, what in the world? I mean, that's something that happens in other countries. And before I knew it, God had opened this whole ministry. He just kind of, I know, dropped it in your heart and your soul. And Zoe Ministries of Delaware was formed. And we're going to talk about something brand new that is just opening. But before we do that, can you just kind of talk a little bit about what it was like? Like, when did this start? How did you sense the calling to fight human trafficking?
Everybody asks me where I get the name Zoe from. They think that it was my first trafficking survivor that I worked with. And I didn't know anything about trafficking. When the Lord called me into this, I was like you. I thought this happened in other countries. I had no idea it happened here. I didn't know what it looked like here in Delaware or domestically. And he called me to just be obedient one step at a time. And thank goodness he didn't give me the whole picture back in 2012.
Wow.
But he called me to form a nonprofit. And I had to create a mission around that nonprofit. And initially I thought I was going to be serving homeless women that were pregnant. And we sort of started down that road. And I gathered a board who trusted the Lord, and we prayed together to try and determine what the mission was. And in that few months, as we were trying to sort of figure out how do we get started and how do we find out what is the need, where is the void in the state, I made a phone call to one of the state agency offices. And she said, where we really have a need is for trafficking survivors. And I said, I don't even know what you mean. I thought a trafficking survivor was somebody that got hit by a car in traffic. That's what I knew about it.
Yeah.
And so God did not call an expert into the field to do this work. He called somebody that knew nothing about it, that had to depend completely on him.
You were available.
I was available.
And that's what he was looking for.
Yes.
Yeah.
Obedient and available. And so we sort of started down the road with learning, what does this look like in the United States? And so I went to various state agencies, law enforcement, Department of Justice, the governor's office, to just ask the question, like, what do we see here? What is happening here in Delaware? Because I've heard that the 95 corridor is a hot spot in the U.S. for trafficking, not just internationally, but domestically. And I was told it doesn't happen here. We don't have a trafficking problem here.
Wow.
And that I really was kind of wasting my time. But I knew the directive that God gave me. And he spoke prophetically through somebody that I really, really trusted. And after that prophetic word came to me, my own spirit knew as I prayed about it. And God confirmed to me that was the word for you. And his word for me at that time was, God is going to create an infrastructure for human trafficking for youth. And he's going to use Zoe Ministries to do it in Delaware. And once he creates that infrastructure, it's going to go out into the nation.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's big, especially being on this side of the story and knowing where you're at.
Yes, but in 2012, that was terrifying.
I'm sure.
But when you ask the Lord to increase my faith, and then he gives you an opportunity to do it, you have a choice. And so I decided I was going to jump with both feet and do whatever he told me to do.
Yeah.
And so I went to Maryland, I went to New Jersey, I went to DC, I went to our surrounding states to figure out what are they seeing in trafficking. Mm-hmm. Because whatever they're seeing is coming through Delaware, and we're probably missing it. Mm. And so they had task forces, they had state legislation, which we had none in 2012. There was nothing in the state of Delaware besides the federal law that had trafficking in our legislative bills. And so even under the federal law, we didn't have any arrests or prosecutions.
Oh, wow.
And so I'm looking at all of our surrounding states that are making dozens of arrests and prosecutions over many years, and looking at Delaware, who's saying we don't have an issue and we don't have state legislation, and this isn't a problem here. And my concern was that we were creating a safe haven in the state of Delaware, because where a perpetrator is going to go when they want to traffic people, they're going to go to a state that has their head in the sand and that isn't aware of it. And that really became my concern. So for the next 2 years, I created a PowerPoint and I took it to whoever would listen. And I will never forget, my very first presentation was in a church basement at 2:00 in the afternoon. And there were these sweet little elderly ladies having tea. And 2 of them slept through the whole thing. And the other 3 politely stayed awake, but were pretty horrified at what I was saying. But one of them said to me afterwards, I have a daughter that's an attorney. And I said, can you please put me in contact with her? And that's how this whole thing started. And she put me in touch with somebody else who put me in touch with somebody else. And I just went to legislators and I said, I want to show you what our issue is here, what I believe our issue is here that we're missing. And it really didn't strike a chord that created any movement. And so I very strategically went to groups of constituents, and I said, you need to call your legislators, tell them you're learning about this and that we need state legislation to fight human trafficking. Mm-hmm. So I did that for 2 years. And in 2014, we passed it was Senate Bill 197, and it was our first legislation against trafficking. Wow. And then I continued to do training. Part of that legislation created a human trafficking council. At the time, it had 13 members. It's been renamed and reconfigured a few times, but I've sat on all 3 of those councils since its inception as the statewide advocate. I'm the only one on that council that is not appointed because of a state agency. Mm. So I'm a community-based advocate member on that council.
Wonderful.
So for a few years, I sat on the council. I continued to train professionals and continued to go all over the state. And then in 2017, we held a statewide conference. And I say we, meaning Zoe Ministries, because I went to the council and I said, I think we need a professional conference. I've been all over speaking to thousands of people about a 101. What does trafficking look like in Delaware? How do you plug in? How do we find it? But we really need first responders and frontline professionals, medical, especially emergency room, nurses and doctors, paramedics, law enforcement, the ones that would be coming in contact, like the kids department, behavioral health, mental health therapists. And so we need to train them. So we need policies and procedures and protocols in all of these different areas throughout the state so we can start identifying. Yeah. And I was told we didn't really need that.
Wow. So not only you're doing all this education, educating people, but you're also meeting all this opposition for those who really want to look the other way.
A lot of opposition.
And not admit to the issue.
And when you admit to the issue, then you have to look at the infrastructure that is available to deal with the issue. Mm. And we had none. So we didn't have enough law enforcement. We didn't have enough investigators. We didn't have a Department of Justice that had any experience in prosecuting these cases. Mm-hmm. And we didn't have aftercare. And we didn't have trauma therapy that was specific to trafficking. Yeah. And so we didn't have any of the infrastructure that we needed if we were to admit, yes, we have this problem. So we didn't want to open that can of worms. And I understand that. But if we are considering the fact that this is a crime, it is the second largest criminal enterprise we have in our country.
Yeah.
So it used to be third, and it has now surpassed weapons.
Wow.
And is now only behind drugs, and it's coming up very close because
wow.
it's a multi-billion-dollar a year industry in the United States. And so we have domestic minor sex trafficking, which is DMST, which is what we specialize in. That's sort of our niche. But there's 25 different forms of trafficking that have been identified by Polaris, which is a national sort of watchdog trafficking organization. And I can give you all the websites at the end that might be helpful. But we are talking specifically about American citizens buying and selling other American citizens to other American citizens for a profit.
Hard to believe.
And it's a $32 billion a year industry.
And it's happening right here.
It's
in our
happening
community.
right here in every community. And it can be either through familial trafficking, where we have parents and grandparents selling children for anything of value. It doesn't necessarily have to be money. It can be drugs, it can be food, it can be shelter, it can be absolutely anything of value.
Wow.
I had one survivor tell me that the cheapest that she was ever sold by her mother was for a carton of cigarettes and a Pepsi.
That's heartbreaking.
And it started when she was 7. So besides the familial trafficking, which is on the rise in this country, we also have residential Latino brothels. We have Asian spas that may look like they're doing reflexology or pedicures or whatever, but they're actual fronts for trafficking.
Wow.
There's so many different types of trafficking that when you say, what do we look for?
That's what I was getting ready to ask, Yolanda.
And that's a great question, but it really does depend on what kind of trafficking are we looking for. So the calls that we have gotten most of the time is from parents or concerned adults with teens who have been schnookered by somebody that they thought was a boyfriend that they fell in love with, that there was actually a bait and switch. So they lure them into a relationship. They're often much older than the youth, and it starts out as a conversation that says, I know that you are old enough and mature enough to handle this relationship, but technically I'm an adult and your parents probably aren't going to like this. So we're going to just keep this between us, but I know you can handle it.
Wow.
And they start building that relationship and luring them in and getting these young women to sort of fall in love with them and start alienating them from anybody that might be able to help protect them from a predator. And so the message might be, if you do your part and I do my part, then when you're 18, we'll stack up until then, and then we'll run away and we'll get married. And there's all of these promises. And what young girl doesn't want to hear that from somebody that she's in love with? And so after 6 or 8 months of grooming her, he may then say, well, I've done my part to stack up and you haven't earned any money yet. So I'm going to set you up on a date. And this is the expectation, and this is how much money you're going to bring me, and then I'm going to keep it. And if she really loves him and wants to keep him and wants to please him and is worried about losing him, she might do it with absolutely no thought, because many of these youth have already been abused as children. And so it's already in their psyche that the person that says they love me and are going to take care of me are going to hurt me. But the perpetrators often will put a little twist on it and say, well, this used to happen to you for free, but now we're giving value to it. Now you're actually making money with it. And so it gives her this sense of purpose and value, as skewed as it is and perverted as that is.
Wow.
And then if she agrees, that's great, and that cycle begins. If she says no, then force, fraud, or coercion are the pieces that usually come in at that point in play, where you either do this or else. And so oftentimes there are other girls that are controlled by the perpetrator who they have watched be punished for not bringing home their quota. And so they know that he's serious. I had one young woman tell me that he went to her house and killed their family dog and shoved it in the mailbox as a sign that I know where you live and I'm not afraid to hurt what you love if you don't do what I say.
Wow.
So when they watch them torture another human being, they know that it's not empty words. And so if they say, if you don't do this, I'm going to go after your sister, or I'm coming after your brother, or I'm going to set your house on fire.
Oh my goodness.
They do whatever they can do to try and protect those that they love. And so then they get caught in this cycle that then becomes bigger than their ability to get out of it, or hiding it from their parents or from anybody that can help protect them or give them any resources.
Yeah.
And then the perpetrator plays on not only their emotion, but there's a trauma bond then that develops, and there's shame and guilt that come from, well, you're the one that chose to do this. We decided together we were going to stack up and get married, and this is your part, and you decided it. You made your bed, and now you're going to lay in it.
Wow.
So the cycle starts that way. So oftentimes we call that sort of like a Romeo pimping, where they lure them into a relationship, and then there's a bait and switch. Sometimes trafficking can happen overseas. We see this a lot with middle-aged Asian women specifically, who come over and are told they're going to have a better life in America, great education, great opportunities for a job, etc. And they're actually met, they fly into a place right outside of LaGuardia called Flushing, New York, where they are then met by their trafficker, who then takes their documents, their ID, their passports, and sells them to the trafficker. And then the only person that they have that's holding all their resources in this other country, and their only translator now, is their perpetrator.
Yeah.
And so then they're told, well, it cost us 10 grand to get you into this country, and now you owe us money and you have to pay us back, and this is how you're going to do it.
Oh my goodness.
And so they may put them in a salon of some kind, or the restaurant business. There's as many ways as there are for people to be creative, to exploit people. That's how many different ways you can traffic somebody.
So how does Zoe Ministries enter into this? I mean, how do you rescue somebody? What can Zoe do?
So we have been running programs since 2017. So we have prevention and aftercare as part of our mission. And so we have an equine mentorship program with several farms throughout the state that we've partnered with in the past that will let us use their farms for 12 weeks at a time. Usually we do the spring and the fall. We shut down that program so that we could really focus on getting our newest program up and running, but we're hoping that this fall we can reopen that program again. So with that equine mentorship program, we have a preventive education curriculum that we use for kids to help them learn how to avoid being lured in, or how to know when they're being groomed. But then we also talk about topics like, what is true love? Really, what is true love? And where does your self-worth come from?
Yes.
And we address the issues that the traffickers try to use and utilize when they see that there's a void there. We try to fill those spaces up and use it as a prevention to keep them from becoming trafficked.
Yeah.
So we do that in our equine mentorship program. We also have a clinical counseling program. We have a phenomenal clinical director who's been working with youth and kids and trauma of all kinds for the last 25 years or more, and she is phenomenal. And we will accept women and youth. I think the ages are 12 or 13 and above in that clinical program, who are trafficked, but also who have had abuses of all kinds, so that we can, again, use that as a prevention to keep them from becoming trafficked later. We also have a traditional mentorship program. So if we have somebody that really wants to mentor a child but is not comfortable in the space of horses, that we can offer that 12-week program as well. We do a lot of community awareness, so we're willing to come into churches and do sort of a human trafficking 101. This is what it looks like in Delaware, and we actually show on the screen different websites and different venues that traffickers can use to traffic individuals. And I usually show in the very city that I'm in, or at least in the county that I'm in, so people see what it really looks like. We also do a lot of professional trainings on trafficking. We've trained law enforcement and judiciary and social workers, behavioral health, the kids department, you name it, will be there to help train so they can identify hospitals especially. And then our newest program that we are just actually launching today.
Tell us more.
Yes. So this is actually the program that God called us to in the very beginning 13 years ago.
Yeah.
All this other programming and all these other steps that we've had to take to help build infrastructure really had to be in place before a program like this could be successful.
Very foundational.
Very foundational.
Right. Okay.
Yes. So we are opening Hannah's House, which is a therapeutic residential program.
Yeah.
It's emotional.
Yes.
For girls that are 12 to 17 who have been trafficked. I have my staff ask me, is it hitting you yet? Is it hitting you yet? And I've always said, no, it's not hitting me yet, but it's starting to hit me today, because we went to the Philadelphia airport this morning, me and another staff member, and I dropped her off, and she should be on the ground right now, actually getting ready to meet our first resident and bring her home to us tomorrow.
Wow.
From the Midwest.
Wow. Bring her home, you said earlier,
Bring her home.
Before we started talking on this podcast. And I just thought that's your heart, is to help these girls find home.
Yes.
And it's not just Hannah's house as home, but to find her home in Jesus.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And people ask us a lot, where did we get the name Zoe Ministries? Zoe is Greek and it means life. And our initial logo was Zoe, the word Zoe etched into a rock. And so it had a dual meaning. It was life in the rock of Christ, but also nurturing life out of hard places. Because there's no harder place for a kid than a life of trafficking. And so that being able to offer life in Christ, that really is our heart. And so we are currently not contracting with the state of Delaware Kids Department. We are a national safe house, and so we are able to take kids from all over the country. So there are very few residentials in the country that are doing the work that we're doing. The UN report a few years ago estimated that between 350 and 375,000 kids every year in the U.S. are being trafficked.
My word.
And there are less than a few hundred beds in the entire nation. So if we look at that from an infrastructure point of view, and we think this is a $32 billion a year industry, right? So the bad guys have the money. And the hundreds of thousands of kids that are going without care because the service providers don't have that money. Because it's really expensive to do a program like this.
Yeah.
Hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
And so if there was a way that we could somehow figure out how to get the money from the bad guys, right? And feed it through the system where we could give, I'm not a lawyer, but, to be able to use asset forfeiture, be able to freeze assets, whatever that language is, to be able to figure out how to do that so that we can feed half of it into law enforcement training and tools and equipment specific to trafficking training, and give the other half to service providers so that we can start building more homes and residentials and even foster care programs, because there's going to be some kids that are not a great fit for residential, but they really need a good foster home. But we really need to supplement what we're doing right now in foster care if we want to include trafficked kids in that population, because so many times there's people with wonderful hearts that really want to help these kids, and they have a lot of love to give, and they say, I have an extra room, I'll take in a kid. But it really complicates things with trafficking history because these girls have learned that the only way that men want to relate to them is sexual. And so that creates a problem in a home with the dad. There also are recruitment issues with biological children because the perpetrator, whom she still believes that she loves, has told her, if you bring me another kid, I'll give you $3,000 and a brand new cell phone. Wow. And so then there's recruitment issues. And then you have a family then that's left really traumatized with that situation, saying, I never want to do this again, because they weren't equipped. They weren't trained. They didn't understand trauma triggers and trafficking history and how complex that trauma really is. And so one of the ways that Zoe Ministries wants to help, and this is a way that listeners could really get involved, especially as we look at building a subset of foster care. We got to get this house open first. Yeah. But down the road, part of the vision that God gave me to build this infrastructure that can go out into the nation is creating foster care that goes beyond just the typical licensing of these homes and training of these homes, but being able to offer the same kind of training that I give to my staff in our residential. So we spend a long time talking about de-escalation and trauma triggers and what trauma does to the brain. And as a result of that, how we respond to the kids in that trauma and what we can expect from them and how not to take any of that personally. And so if we had hundreds of families in every state saying, I'm willing to be trained and I will open my home for a year to these kids, and we want Zoe Ministries training for this, and we're willing to do it, then we also would come in and train the church. So if we had 5 to 10 families in every church that said, yes, I'm willing to do this, and we came in and trained that whole entire church, then the church is the one that provides the wraparound care to those families. Yes. And not the 25 staff members of Zoe Ministries that spread thin throughout the nation. And so if they need help with respite care, if they need help with laundry, if they need a birthday party thrown, if they need some extra funding, if they need whatever it is that they need, those churches can wrap around and support. Because I do believe that churches are a huge part of the answer to the infrastructure that we are missing. Yeah. Because if the government could have filled it, it would have been filled. We can throw money all day long, and we can have programs all day long. But if we do not have the basis of helping these children find their identity in Christ rather than what has happened to them, we're totally missing what we're supposed to be doing.
I would think it would be really difficult if you were not trained to anticipate that they will push back, then the very first time, because you feel like you're helping them, you're rescuing them, you're helping to save them, and then they come in and they're maybe get angry, right? I'm sure there's all kinds of emotions.
They're absolutely, and rightfully so.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so they're not going to come in and say, thank you so much for opening your home.
Right. Yeah.
So being able to understand that ahead of time and why some of the behaviors are the way they are really is very helpful in the training. And that's what a lot of our foster care is missing throughout the country. Yeah.
So Hannah's house is equipped to handle how many girls?
So we are licensed for 6 maximum. Now, our home is large, and we could probably house 12. But with all of the traveling that I've done throughout the country to other residentials, there have been homes that have opened for 8 or 10 or 12, and within a year they're shut down. And so we've sort of discovered through some research that 6 is kind of the magic number. It's the best practice for this population because of all of the trauma and because of all of the triggers. I mean, think about it, Denise. If you just have 6, quote, normal, healthy, relational teenagers.
You're already crazy.
In the same room, in the same space, you're going to see some stuff, right? But if you put complex trauma on top of that, and you consider all of the interpersonal trauma that happened over weeks, years of time, it takes a really, really long time to just build safety. And we can put these kiddos in a home or even at Hannah's house, and we know that they're safe, but they have to experience felt safety in their bodies and in their brains. And that takes certain amount of time, certain amount of training, and a whole lot of patience. And if you are not equipped for that, you're going to feel really discouraged from the very beginning.
Yeah. But you've been working with your staff. You feel like you're ready.
Yes. We have been working, we have been training, we have had mock days, we have had de-escalation trainings, we've done everything we know to do. We know that there's going to be things that come up that we've missed. And we say, oh, we need a policy for that. Or
that's how they come to be,
exactly, right? So we know that we're not naive to think we have everything covered. We know there's a lot that because we haven't started this type of work yet, that we're not, there's no way to train for it.
Yeah. So you're open to serve the nation.
We are open to serve the nation.
Wow. And this is just the beginning, I have a feeling.
Yes.
How does that make you feel, Yolanda? You have been laboring for a very long time.
It's very humbling. I've made a lot of mistakes. And God in his grace has still said, I want to partner with you. And the fact that he would say that to me, to say is humbling is the understatement of the year. And it's exciting.
Yeah.
It's terrifying. All kind of at the same time. But I would say if I had to say one word, the posture of humility of me and my staff is really the best way I can think to describe it. Because we really are aiming at the enemy's camp here. We are storming the gates of hell and proactively, intentionally going into a camp that the enemy has had in this state and in this country for way too long. And it is time to take it back.
Amen. Amen, sister. So I was looking at this sign that I have hanging on my wall in my office. It's Galatians 6:9, which you're probably familiar with. Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. And there's so much in that little tiny verse, because we always want our prayers answered as soon as we pray them. But there's something about that at the proper time, and which is so totally up to God. And so he knew in all of this that it was going to come to this point, and that you have not laid it down, that you have continued to march forward and do what God's called you to do. I believe that there's amazing things. I know it won't be easy, but I believe there's amazing things ahead.
And we have seen so many amazing things and miracles, and watching God's faithfulness. That's where we put our stake in the ground. It's not in our knowledge. It's not in our education, our training. It is in God's faithfulness. And when he says he's going to do something, nobody can stop it. And so we're just along for his ride. We are just putting our hand to the work that he is doing.
Yeah.
So
we get to be part of his story. That's pretty glorious.
Yes, it sure is. Yes.
All right. Was there ever a time that you contemplated if this mission was just too big, too much for you?
Many times. Many times. And sometimes it probably would be more recent than what some people would think after being in this for 13 years. But it sort of went in waves. Yeah. And God would let us see miracles, and we would live on that mountaintop, and then we live in the valley for a really long time. And that verse that you just read about it being in his time, it's all about the process. Yeah. And I had to learn in the last 13 years all of the hard lessons I've learned, some of them through my own sin, my own mistakes, and his glorious grace and mercy that allowed me to even want to have the faith to continue. Because the fact that I even wanted to be obedient is a gift of his grace. The fact that I was willing to keep going was a gift of his grace. And so I just rode on his grace wave from mountaintop to mountaintop.
I love that. Yeah. I think that we're all called to do something for the kingdom. And so many times it feels way bigger than we could ever think that we could accomplish. But that's the purpose. We can't accomplish it without God.
That's right.
So has it surprised you, the opposition that you faced?
It has. When I first started this work, I thought as soon as people know about this, as soon as they find out this is really happening, everybody's going to jump on board and want to fight it. And I was disillusioned and disheartened to learn that that was not the case. And I know that the enemy has, blinders on, and this is a multi-billion-dollar industry every year. And when you start messing with people's financials, it's not real popular. And so, we've heard about Epstein. We've heard about all the big cases in the news, and so we have found that perpetrators oftentimes are people that we would not expect. They might be teachers or doctors or lawyers or people sitting in our church pews. And it's not real popular to say this, but the jet fuel for trafficking is actually pornography. And so even when people hit that free button, it drives up the demand. Because what people don't realize is that oftentimes on the other side of that camera is a woman who is being forced, frauded, or coerced to act in that way or else. And so it may not be a brothel, but it might be behind a camera and pornography. And we know there's a lot of pornography use within our church. And it's time that we start being real and authentic and looking at that and saying, what are we doing? If we don't want to just help Zoe Ministries, we want to drive down the demand. How do we drive down the demand? By driving down pornography. And so that's what we all can do in our churches and get real and authentic about what are we really doing here?
Yeah. All right. So obviously we want to be praying for you and for your team and Zoe Ministries and Hannah's house.
Yes.
How exciting. But what else? How else can we help?
If you go to our website, there's an opportunity to be able to give financially. We would love to be able to have enough support that I don't have to spend my time finding and writing grants, that we don't have to spend our time negotiating with state agencies to only find that we don't have enough. This is really an expensive program, but I believe that if everybody gives just a little and enough people do that, that we won't have to be dependent on the government or have parents try to come up with the money when they find out that their child is trafficked, but in order to get help from the state, they have to sign their child over, to state custody in order to get state help. And parents understandably don't want to do that. And so most programs won't take private placements. And so we want to be able to take children that are private placements, but we have to have the money to be able to do that. So I would love to have a couple thousand people all say, we'll give $35 a month or $50 a month or whatever it is they feel led to give. And that support looses up our time and gives us more freedom to do the actual work rather than trying to find the money. So the prayer is huge. Financial support is huge. People who are in this area that would want to become a mentor, that would be really helpful. Or churches that want to organizationally say, we are willing to be trained. We have 3 families that want to become foster families. Will you come train our church? And so when we're ready to launch that program in the fall, we would love for listeners and your audience to prayerfully consider becoming a part of that.
All right. And how can they reach you?
Zoe-Delaware.org is our website. So it's ZOE-Delaware spelled out .org.
Okay. Yolanda, thank you.
Thank you.
Executive Director of Zoe Ministries of Delaware and Hannah's House, Yolanda Montgomery, our guest today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we pray God's greatest blessings on you and your family and this ministry, in particular, the young girls who are going to be rescued and redeemed by the blood of the Lamb. Wow. we get to be part of that. And so I thank you for listening today. It's been an honor to spend this time with Yolanda and with you. And we pray that if God moves on your heart, that you would reach out to the ministry and help them as well. Until our next sip, I'm Denise Harper for Over the Rims of Mugs. We were never meant to journey alone. Whether you're having a great day or a hard one, we need each other to celebrate and to stand in the gap. Sharing our stories helps remind us that we're not alone. And when we sit with women who sit at the feet of Jesus, the conversations are different. We walk away feeling inspired, not inferior, because we know this Christian walk is a race, but not a competition. Thank you for listening to this episode of Over the Rims of Mugs. To share a comment, suggest a topic, or ask a question, email us podcast@wearethebridge.org. And please join me for a daily devotion on my blog entitled Treasured Inside. You can find it directly at deniseharper.blog or at wearethebridge.org/devotion. Until our next sip, I'm your host, Denise Harper, encouraging you to catch up with a friend or make a new one and enjoy some good conversation over the rims of mugs.